on my island of England in my splendid isolation, sipping my tea, with my sun never setting in my empire, I am a lot better than any of you other guys. And you Vive la France people, you all think you're the best, and you can't wait for, remember this word we talked before, revanchism. You can't wait to get revenge against those Germans, those different people on the other side. Remember the Franco-Prussian War, and we talked about that? Okay? So the French all want revenge. The Germans, and I've got this militaristic, yes, we're the new kid on the block, we're really better than England attitude. The Russian bear, the reason they call Russia a bears is kind of like, you know, they're really, really powerful. They take a little while to get going, but once they get going, man, they can be strong. The Russian bear, man, they've had the same family, the Romanovs, ruling them for 300 years. The Italians, hey, look, we just got on the block here, we're great. And the Austrians are doing the exact opposite. This is what makes this such a fascinating time period. It's almost like who's going to win? The nationalists, the Germans, the French, or the anti-nationalists, the empires? Because remember, the Austro-Hungarian Empire hates nationalism. Nationalism is killing them. They're no longer the Austrian Empire. They're the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And if they're not careful, they're going to be Austro-Hungarian, Polish, Czechoslovakian, Albanian, Romanian Empire. They don't want any of that. They want to be one empire. So nationalism is huge as far as this goes. Okay? And this really helps show you what I was just talking about. I really want you to kind of burn this image into your brain of this particular map, because look at all of the different ethnic groups that you have here. Right? You can see, if this were France, for example, it would all be one color. They're all Frenchmen. Right? Maybe a little bit here, a little bit there. But here, in this Balkan powder keg, look at all the different ethnic groups. They all want their little piece of the pie. They all want their own country. I want you to also memorize this map for 2 more time periods. What's going to happen when the war is over? And you want to make this a country. What's the country going to be? How are you going to draw the borders if you've got some Serbs here and some Serbs in, some Bulgars there and some Bulgars there? And then, if you do actually make a country, and let's say, oh, I know, they're all Slavs. Let's just call it like Yugoslavia, which means many Slavs. What's going to happen if that country falls apart like it did in 1989? So memorize that map for that reason, okay? Please? Now, one last thing I want to say before I explain these guys. Your book, and this is another picture I'm talking about here. Before we leave underlying causes, your book and many teachers and many other books will talk about how important imperialism was to the war. It was and it wasn't. And I want to point something out here. You cannot say that the imperialism in Africa caused World War I. Not directly. It's not a direct cause. And the best example of that is the fact that, remember that, the British want this in Africa, and the French want that in Africa, and the Germans want this in Africa. The 2 countries that fought the most over Africa were the British and the French. They fought about Egypt, they fought about Northern Africa. But the British and the French are on the same side in World War I. So obviously, the fighting that they had in Africa had no effect on what side they took in World War I. Does this make sense to all of you? So it was an indirect cause because they were just used to fighting over everything. They were competitive with each other. And that competitiveness was that whole nationalism kind of thing. Okay? So we've got all the underlying causes. But something's going to stop the whole thing. And that something is Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife. The Archduke, of course, well, not of course, you don't know this, most of you anyway, was the heir to the Austrian throne. He was next in line to be the Emperor of Austria. And like all the emperors and princes, he's going to tour the empire every once in a while, wave to the people, have a little parade. And on June 28th of 1914, he was in Sarajevo, just outside the empire, waving to the local Serbians. Hey, how you doing? Amanda, please. And on June 28th, 1914, one more time, a man by the name of Gavril Princip, not so much do you know his name as you know the organization that he was in, as a member of the Black Hand, a small terrorist group, assassinated the Austrian Archduke. I want to tell you a little bit about these guys, though. You want to know why? Because they were all students. There was 5 of them. 5 students, some as young as 16 years old. So people your age, 5 of them, started the worst war in human history. And World War I is the worst war. It is so important to everything. I know a lot of us think that World War II is the worst war because, you know, you got the Holocaust, and you got the A-bomb, and all this other kind of stuff. And certainly World War II is very, very, very important. But World War I does some other things, not just because you couldn't have World War II without World War I, but World War I does some things that absolutely positively so change everything around the world that you have to really label it as the most important war in human history. 5 students started it. What's also funny about these 5 students is some of them were so young that they could not be tried as an adult. You can see Gabriel actually gets captured here, right? 2 other of the members of the Black Hand who were involved in the assassination were caught, and because they were juveniles, could only get a certain number of years in prison. So guess what? They get let out of prison years later, and they lived normal lives. One of them turned out to be a middle school principal. Can you imagine if you're in school and you're talking to your principal, and he's teaching World War I, and he says, "Oh yeah, I started that thing." That's literally what it was like. Okay? 5 of them, 5 kids, started the worst war in human history. Why did they do it? Did they know they were starting a war? Of course not. They were, you know, gung-ho, ultra-nationalistic Serbians. I hate that Austrian SOB. Let's just kill them. But then the next question is, 2 more, please. How did this, 1 more. How did the assassination of one man cause the whole world to go to war? And we are talking the whole world, not just Europe. Because there's been assassinations before. I'll try to stay over here if I can now. There have been assassinations before. Tsar Nicholas II, Tsar Alexander II was assassinated. No war out of that. The President of the United States, William McKinley, was assassinated in 1900. No war comes out of that. One guy, not even the leader, the second, you know, the guy who's going to be the next leader, gets assassinated. And they fight a world war? How come? In order to understand that, you must understand the concept of mobilization. Alright, and again, yeah, this is nice. I don't really care about this. What I want you to know is that mobilization is getting ready for war. It's doing everything other than actually fighting the war. You give your soldiers their guns, you give them their rations, you give them their orders. You get everybody ready, all the plans are in motion. You do everything except, Trey, you listening? Everything except cross the border. Okay? Obviously, you can't fight a war if you don't first get ready for war. So what actually happened? Okay? Here's what happens. The Austrians are, of course, pissed off. Their Archduke has just been killed. So they decide to tell the Serbians, hold on, I need my pointer somewhere. There it is. They tell the Austrians, you sons of bitches, we're going to get you. You've got 24 hours or else. And they gave them this ultimatum that the Serbians had to absolutely positively follow. For the most part, the Serbians gave in, but it was just too much, because the Serbians' attitude is, it was a small group of kids who did this. You can't punish the whole country. You're crazy. And Serbia turns to their Slavic brothers behind them, to Russia. Help! The Russians look at the Serbs. And remember, not only are the Serbs also Slavs, but the Russians would love to be down here. What better way to get down there than to beat up some Austrians and get down there? The Russians are like, sure, we'll help you. Meanwhile, the Germans are looking at their older brother. Remember the whole German-Austrian thing, right? The Germans are like the younger brother, the Austrians are the older brother. Together, the German brothers will rule Europe kind of thing. Y'all follow me on this? Well, the Germans are really worried because the Austrians just got their Archduke killed. And the Germans realize that if the Austrians don't be tough, that before they know it, everyone's going to be challenging the Austrians. The Bulgarians and the Romanians and the Poles are all going to want a piece of Austria. So the Germans are telling their older Austrian brother, who they really want to stay tough, hey man, you got to put them down. And we'll help you put them down. We'll do anything you need. The Germans give the Austrians what's called a blank check, meaning you do anything you want, you have our support. So the Germans are egging the Austrians on because they want the Austrians to really put these guys down. And the Austrians have no problem with it because they realize they have to put them down. This has been a real challenge to their authority. Austria, once and for all, needs to make sure everybody understands that you don't mess with them. Okay? So in other words, they're using the assassination as an excuse